Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the life of an absolutely incredible historical figure, Surdas, who is often celebrated as the blind emperor of Braj Basha. We're talking about an individual who overcame just monumental physical and societal odds to leave an absolutely lasting cultural legacy on medieval India and honestly, the world beyond. His story is this amazing blend of profound devotion, extraordinary musical talent, and a literal literary revolution that fundamentally shifted how millions of people connect with the divine.
But right off the bat, we're faced with a massive historical paradox. I mean, think about it. How could a man who was supposedly blind from the very day he was born write some of the most vivid, colorful, and visually spectacular poetry in Indian history? This is the central mystery of Surdas. His verses describe the exact shades of green in the fields, the intricate details of a deity's garments, and the playful expressions of a child with stunning, crystal-clear accuracy. Was this a divine vision, or is there more to the historical record? Well, we are going to unpack the whole shebang.
Section 1. The Blind Emperor's Vision, Origins and Spectacular Accomplishments. So Surdas is universally crowned with the title Vatsalya Samrat, which basically translates to the Emperor of Maternal Love. He earned this because he had this unparalleled mastery when it came to depicting the playful and sometimes completely mischievous childhood antics of Lord Krishna. You have to remember, before Surdas, religion was often heavily guarded by complex Sanskrit rituals. It was all about a sense of distant awe. But Surdas, he completely democratized it. He pioneered Vatsalya Bhakti, which means approaching God with the unconditional, messy love a parent has for a child. His poetry was so profound that his verses are actually enshrined in the Sikh Holy Scripture, the Guru Granth Sahib.
Tracing his life, he was born around 1478. Now, scholars still debate whether he was born in Runakata near Agra or Sihi near Delhi. But we know he was born into a poor Brahmin family. Tradition tells us he was blind from birth, and because of this, his family largely neglected him. But here is the astonishing part. At just 6 years old, recognizing his own detachment from a world that ridiculed him, he packed up and left home entirely to become an ascetic. By 1510, traditional accounts say he met his spiritual guru, Vallabhacharya, and he eventually passed away between 1581 and 1584 at Chandrasaravara, Parsoli. That means he lived to be over 100 years old.
His rise to prominence is, honestly, nothing short of miraculous. After leaving home at 6, this young blind boy took up residence right on the banks of the Yamuna River, and out there he somehow mastered music, learned multiple instruments, and perfected his poetry. By the time he was a teenager, his reputation had grown so much that he was appointed the chief singer at the famous temple at Govardhan. Ultimately, he became the foremost member of the Ashtachhap, which were the 8 celebrated poet saints of the Vallabha tradition. He literally shaped the entire Bhakti movement with his daily musical compositions.
His fame actually spread like wildfire, reaching all the way to the Mughal Emperor Akbar in Delhi. Akbar was so moved by Surdas's lyrics that he requested the poet sing for him in person. But when the emperor asked Surdas to compose a song about his royal exploits, Surdas flat out refused. Instead, he sang this incredibly powerful verse. I know no one other than my cowherd protecting Gopal. I have given up everything, even my caste. Historical records say this display of unyielding devotion literally brought the powerful Emperor Akbar and his legendary court musician Tanzin to tears.
Section 2. Masterpieces of Braj Pasha, the Ocean of Melody.
We can actually quantify the sheer scale of his literary revolution by looking at his 3 primary surviving masterpieces. The most famous, without a doubt, is Sagar, which means the ocean of melody. Originally, this magnum opus was said to contain a staggering 100,000 poems. Today, about 8,000 survive. Then we have Sur Saravali, which dives deep into cosmic genesis and joyous festivals like Holi. And finally, Sahitya Lahiri, a shorter but super complex work of 118 verses that explores intricate devotion, philosophy, and poetic styling.
Now, to truly grasp his genius, you don't need to look any further than his most iconic composition, Maya Moria Minha Makankayo, which translates to, Mother, I did not eat the butter. It's brilliant. Surdas perfectly captures an innocent, young Krishna caught red-handed with butter literally smeared all over his face, trying to playfully convince his mother that he's innocent. But using the everyday, vernacular Braj Basha dialect instead of formal highbrow Sanskrit, Surdas made the divine entirely relatable, lovable, and so deeply human for everyday people.
Section 3. Legends, Mysteries, and Controversies, Separating Fact from Faith.
Okay, so the most intense debate among historians and followers surrounds his blindness. Traditional legend insists he was completely blind from birth, and believers maintain he was granted an active inner divine vision by the Lord, which is what allowed him to describe colors, garments, and faces so perfectly. However, the historical debate points to his extremely vivid, accurate descriptions of green fields, animals, and subtle human expressions. To many historians, this suggests it's highly probable he actually had physical sight early on and lost his vision much later in life.
Then there's the pretty shocking Ratnavali controversy. Some traditions claim Surdas was actually married to a beautiful woman named Ratnavali. According to this rather dark legend, she taunted him for his physical appearance, which drove him to intentionally blind himself out of self-disgust and a burning desire to renounce the world. But there is a very strong counterclaim from many scholars who maintain that Surdas was a lifelong, celibate ascetic who left his family as a child and never married at all. We're just presenting both sides here because it's a huge piece of his complex historiography.
Another massive controversy involves his spiritual lineage. The sectarian belief, which is heavily promoted by the Vallabha tradition, is that Surdas was initiated by Mahaprabhu Vallabhacharya around 1510 and that this guru completely shaped his theology. Modern textual evidence, though, throws a bit of a wrench in that narrative. Scholars point out the awkward logic in the stories of their meeting. More crucially, his earliest poems completely lack any mention of Vallabha or his specific theological doctrines. This strongly suggests Surdas might have actually been an entirely independent poet.
Section 4. Perspectives from Modern Scholars. Textual Analysis.
And this perfectly highlights how modern scholars approach his story. Take scholar Hazari Prasad Dwivedi, for example. He noted that while Surdas frequently referred to himself as blind in his lyrics, he often styled himself as blind by karma or an unlucky soul. A lot of scholars interpret this as metaphorical blindness. It's a poetic expression of spiritual humility, or the feeling of being blinded by the illusions of the material world, rather than a strict medical diagnosis of being physically blind from the moment he was born.
Now here's a truly fascinating discovery from manuscript analysis of the Sagar. When researchers look at the earliest surviving 16th century manuscripts, the thematic focus leans heavily toward the pining of youthful lovers, that intense longing and separation, known as viraha. Yet, if you look at his modern reputation today, it is almost entirely dominated by his focus on the child Krishna and maternal love. It's wild. It really shows how a poet's legacy and the way his work is curated can totally shift over the centuries.
Section 5. 5 Pillars of His Legacy. A definitive summary. Let's synthesize all of this into the 5 pillars of his legacy. First, democratizing spirituality. Surdas completely bypassed the need for formal priests and rigid caste barriers. He preached that pure devotion was all that mattered, opening salvation up to the marginalized. Second, the vernacular revolution. By writing in the local Braj Bhasha dialect, he took deep philosophical concepts out of elite Sanskrit texts and handed them directly to the farmers, boatmen, and everyday villagers. Third, pioneering Vatsalya Bhakti. He completely humanized God. By depicting the divine as a lovable, scoldable, mischievous child, he shifted medieval spirituality away from fear and toward a really deep, accessible intimacy. Moving on to the 4th pillar, his integration of kirtan. Surdas helped structure daily temple worship around continuous, highly rhythmic classical musical compositions. His melodies allowed his spiritual message to transcend regional boundaries, and they permanently shaped Indian classical music. Finally, Pillar 5, defying physical limits. Whether he lost his sight early on or much later in life, he faced absolutely monumental societal and physical obstacles. Yet despite all of that, he created a visual and poetic universe that remains entirely unmatched in its beauty. 8,000. Just take a second to absorb that number. That is the sheer volume of surviving poems attributed to his magnum opus. And you have to keep in mind, these aren't just words sitting on a page in some dusty archive. These 8,000 lyrical songs continue to be actively sung in villages, homes, and temples across India every single day, centuries after he first composed them sitting in the dust by the river. That's a legacy.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Whether he saw the world with physical eyes that slowly faded over time, or through some inexplicable inner divine vision from birth, did Surdas ultimately see the truth of human emotion, love, and devotion more clearly than anyone else? His legacy really challenges us to consider what it truly means to see. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks your curiosity to go out and explore his incredible poetry for yourself.